Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video on this channel, and today we have a look into combining Nitro, something modern, something state-of-the-art, with something that's been around for a long time. EJS, embedded JavaScript templates. Let's go. Alright, after hearing the intro you might wonder, wait, Alex, are you for real? Do you want to combine something like super old and existing with something new and modern? And yes, I am for real, because hey, maybe you have an old legacy application that still uses EJS, maybe with Express, and you want to put it in like a new, modern, state-of-the-art way without a big boom migration, because that doesn't always work, right? Especially when it's a big one. So it also shows how Nitro and H3 are actually compatible with all these things with a little bit of tweaking, still utilizing not only the file system. But for everyone not knowing what EJS is, let's jump right into it. EJS, also known as embedded JavaScript templating, probably nobody ever uses the whole word like in the intro, just EJS, is more or less a little template engine. So the idea is to say everything in these funny little lesser than percent and so on is an expression that can be used with data. So for example, here we can have like some if flow, we can render some variables, some expressions, and we're all good. And that all works on the server. It technically also works on the client, but it's very uncommon to do that on the client side. It has been in use for a while together, for example, with Express, and it's also super easy. So now our goal is pretty simple. We want to combine this older template engine together with Nitro. And as I said before, we don't only want to rely on the file system, because as you all know, with Nitro, you have unstorage under the hood. Also made a video about it before, where you can use anything as like a storage and get your data from there. So if you say, okay, I have my templates right there as a file, that's great. If you have them in a database for whatever reason, that's also fine. You can all utilize that with the same interface. So our goal is simple: demo application, add EJS, add some EJS files from an example repository, and get them up and running with data as well. And then see what performance improvements we can do in terms of caching and so on, so on, so on. Our demo application is as usual as minimal as possible. We have only Nitro here, but you can of course do the same in everything that uses Nitro. We have a source tier set up here as the server directory. And in the server directory, we don't have much. We have a route, basically just saying hello world. We have a look at that in a second. And we have the fav icon, that's just Nitro icon. So we make sure that the request here doesn't go into nowhere. So if we take a look at it in the browser index page, we will see the following: hello world. Yes, you might be aware of that. Also the style, of course, to make sure that it's not flashing in your eyes. And I think that's a really good start. So from here, the first thing we should do is install EJS. So after adding the EJS package and the dependency, and of course also the types, because why not, we are almost good to go. Now, if we say everything should be rendered by EJS, we probably should set up not an index.ts here, but more like a catch-all, and then have like, I don't know, slug.ts here. So that makes sure that every single page is rendered by EJS eventually, if the EJS page exists, right? So the next thing we want to do is actually adding the EJS parts from some repository. So let's jump into the browser and see if we find something suitable to add. Of course, a suitable repository is just the EJS demo repository from a very well-known DigitalOcean guide on how to use EJS with Express.js over here, right? That's 4 years old. It still works like that, but the only thing we need is this views package, this view folder, so to say. And we copy all this content here over into our demo application and go through that bit by bit. And after copying everything over, we can go through these files. I put them into server and then into assets. Why? I will explain in a little bit, but let me tell you, they will be loaded from there. And we have pages. So we have about right here, and we have index that also exists. They also have some includes. So these are in the partials folder to include, for example, the head. I load some tiny tinkering here, and the footer, of course, and the header, right? So these are included in, for example, here and there. And that's also one of the tricky parts. So let's get started. We have the files in there. Now we want to resolve them somehow. So how do we resolve them? Because right now it just renders that hello world. So that's definitely not enough. So the first thing we should do is we should probably just say like, okay, we add another utils folder. And in the utils here, we should add an EJS file, because everything that we want to do with the EJS part, we can just write as an extra function, because that's, I think, the cleanest way to do. So we can do something like export, it will be async most likely function, and let's call it, I don't know, get EJS template function. We given a key, so that should fit like, okay, this should get, let's say, pages about to render, for example, or also an include part. So we'll see that. And in here, what we want to do, well, obviously render the page and then return that. Let's see how we can do that. The good thing is EJS has a compile function, so we can just say recurrent compile here. And now we have to get the template somehow in here. So like to do template, we need to get it here. And we have options if we want to say, okay, I don't know, set it async true by default. So EJS has async support, for example, and various other things. We'll also come to that in a second again. But we can try it very simple. The first thing we have to do though is we have to refer to these files here on the side, right? To assets, views, pages. So how do we do that? Because now we can start like, okay, EJS supports the file system, but as mentioned before, Nitro in the file system, yeah, works, but having more universal approach is better. So we will use unstorage, that I also mentioned before and also talked about in another video, to get all the data. And as I said, like now we put them in our project. It could be living somewhere totally different in the KV store, in a MongoDB, wherever, in a GitHub repository even if you want to. So you can even query it from there if you really feel like, HTTP calls, whatnot. But in our case, we'll go with the most simple version. You can adapt it to your needs, and the source code is also in the description to check it out. So we get the storage with useStorage, and then we just fetch the right key and render the template. Let's give it a try. So to do that, we have to define EJS storage key. It's always nice to not repeat yourself. And we put it in server assets views. So actually, Nitro has this convention to access the server assets through assets:server, and then we can just access a subfolder with views. You could also name it EJS or whatever, it doesn't matter. Just this part is static. You can also define your own storage in the Nitro config, but I've shown it in a different video and that's not the scope here. So we just roll with that. And now what we want to do, of course, is first we want to get the page template. So here we say, okay, we get EJS view storage is useStorage. We have this here and we use the storage key. And now what we could do is we could say, all right, you know what? We can just say const view is await EJS view storage dot get item here. And this should be a string. So in here we say, all right, give that to us and let's just pass in the key. And then we have the view so we can compile it, right? So far so good. So why not trying that out? Maybe even with a static one, so we don't rely on the template name so far. Here we could just say, okay, get EJS template function, and let's just do pages colon. It also works with a slash index.ejs. So let's give that a try and see what will happen. The first thing we'll get is cannot send function as response from H3, the underlying HTTP framework, which you can compare to Express, for example. And that makes a lot of sense because right now what we do is in the code itself, we just return the function that we got. But this is the template function. And now we want to maybe run this with some data. But in our case, with the index, yeah, there should be probably some data. So maybe choose it to about, we'll do that later. And we can just run the template function. And we can also, well, we have to call await over here. That looks better. And then return the template function and see what will happen now. And here we go, another 500 request error. It says could not find the include file partials head. Yeah, here the tricky part starts because obviously the includes are being looked up by the file system, so to say, and can't really find that. Now we could start say, hey, here's a root, let's use the file system, but then this won't work in all the platforms. So instead what we do is we fetch the includes ourselves and then just write a custom include callback to make sure we can get the data out of that. Sounds complicated? Don't worry, I'll show you how. Back to the EJS, here we have to do a bit more work then. So the page template works totally fine, but in here we need to do a bit more because we want to properly include all the content. So what we want to do is probably before here, we say const includes lookup. All the includes is, let's say, we want to resolve the includes. Not with an EJS function, unfortunately, because this is what we have to write our own, but luckily it won't be that tricky. So we can just say, okay, let's create a function, resolve includes, and we're fine. It might be async. Very likely, because also, once again, we have to do what we did before. We have to say, okay, we need a storage, like we do here. We need that EJS view storage. And actually, now we need all the keys. So let's say const keys is EJS view storage dot get keys. We want to get all the content that's in there. And now we want to filter out the includes. So the includes in there are obviously all the keys that start, oops, yeah, we have to await that function. That's a good point. All the keys, okay, that actually starts with pages. These are not the includes, but the ones that have the includes are actually the ones that starts with partials. Because in our folder here, in our assets views, we have pages and partials. So they start with partials colon or pages colon. And in partials, they're all our includes. So we have these includes here. And now what we want to do is, of course, we want to create the resolved entries. So we'll just map this and say, okay, you know what? We await a promise.all. We run through all the includes. You might want to batch that if you have a lot of includes, but for this simple case, that might work. We say all the includes dot map. And that will also be an async function, obviously. Let me quickly collapse that sidebar. So we have that include or an include key. Maybe let's also rename this to include keys. Include keys, yeah, that sounds good. And in here, we basically say, okay, we want to get the content from that store. So let's say const include content is EJS view storage get item. Once again, it will be a string. And we just say pass in the key. Wonderful. And it's the include key in this case. So here we have that item. We have to await that. And then what we want to return is, of course, the key for that include and the content that we just fetched. Now we have the resolved entries. And here we want to say we return object.from entries to have a full object and make it also performant. So it's an easy lookup with the resolved entries. And that's technically the whole thing that's happening here. Maybe need one more parent, and here we go. So we can resolve all the includes. That will just happen once for all, right? Now it will be called every time something renders, but we can also improve that in a bit. So we're good. We also still have a few duplicate things over there, like we have useStorage 2 times. We can improve that later on. But now we have this lookup of includes. And here, the custom includer comes into play. So we have that compile function down here, and it allows us to write an includer function to say, okay, how to get all the includes. We need the original path here as a string. That's the most important part. And now we have to do a few things, because the first thing is we want eventually to return a template and here's some content, right? To include the template of the file. If we now check our, let's say, index.ejs, we have include colon, like dot slash partials hat. So depending on what's in your application happening, you might want to replace a few things, because the original path, let's say we have path to check. And here we want to say we take the original path and want to replace the first dot slash with nothing. Because, well, our key should be partials colon hat.ejs and not dot slash partials slash and so on and so on. So we can remove that. And then we want to replace all the leftover slashes with colons. And we have the path to check. Now the only thing we want to add is EJS, of course, at the end, because the file ending is also important. We can move it in a template string as well. We can split it up a little bit, and that's that. And now what we want to do is we want to say, does it exist? So we have include content is, let's get the includes lookup here. We put in the path to check. And if there is none available for whatever reason, then we can say, you know what, let's just throw a create error here and say, all right, status is 500 and message is something like could not find include. And then we just put in the original path here to say, hey, look, this was not available at all. So otherwise, we have the content and we can just return it and we're good. So let's see how this and if this even works in the browser and see what will happen. In the browser, we'll see content. That's great. No error messages, nothing. But the promise objects here are a bit wrong because these should be the includes. So let's see why that doesn't work. And that's because we've set async to true over here. And that doesn't play in well with the includes. So we just remove that. It will not change anything, luckily. We're still good. And if we now go into the browser, we will see the includes. EJS is fun, home, about, yes, this exists, we're here, it works. The only thing, the routing doesn't work right now because we didn't implement it. So let's do that, let's get going. To implement the routing, well, we have to call that get EJS template function with, well, the appropriate key. So instead of calling that EJS template function with a fixed key, we want to get our own key. So let's say our key is, first, let's start maybe with the path param. So in here, in our sidebar, in a file, we named it slug.ts. So what we can do is we use get router param from h3 as a helper. We pass in the event, and then we say we want to get the slug here. And this will be an array, string array whatsoever. So what we can do is this param. Let's just quickly return the param here and see what will happen. Maybe as a JSON object, because then we have a nicer screen. And then we see, oh yeah, the path param is about. If we go to slash, it's actually nothing. So we have to consider that as well. So let's say we go to /about/abc, it's about/abc. Wonderful. So what we can do here now in the code is we have the param. So we say if the param doesn't exist, we add index because that's the param then. Of course, there's more to do for you later on if you want to, like other index handling, for example. You can also say you do it once per route, like you give paths in and so on, so on. And also don't forget to sanitize your path. That's very important. So to make sure to strip things, to not allow .. and so on, so on. You know all the tricks here. So we do a very simple thing. What we want to do is say const transform path, or let's just say const key. We take the path param, and then we just say replace all the slashes with a colon. We add pages in front. That's very important. And we want to add .ejs at the end because that will resemble the key down there. So we also move this to a template string. Still don't forget that, please. Don't just copy paste that because you don't want to be vulnerable to possible issues. And now we can say, okay, let's check out what, for example, /about and the normal slashes in the browser. And we see on /about, that works fine. If we now navigate to home, we get another error. Why is that? Oh, tagline is not defined. Mascots. We need some data. So let's fill in the data that's needed. And of course, that's the other thing that comes in here. We need some data. So let's say in this case, the data is pretty simple. If we open our index EJS, we have some includes, but then we have a tagline here that will be interpreted straight away. Then we have mascots for each, name, org, birth year. Let's quickly fix that and make it camel case because, well, so we have to adapt that. Let's say the path param is index. Then we want to send some data. Of course, you can do it in a more elaborate way. And otherwise, there's just nothing. So what we can do is the tagline here is it works. Nitro is amazing. Also follow and subscribe because we're very close to 10K. Please really do this. That would be amazing. And then we have the mascots, and the mascots is an array. So we can say name is, I don't know, Denise. Not sure if written like that, but you got it. Birth year is -2000. And organization is, I don't know, my random org. So we can have that, and we can copy this one over another time to make sure this is actually really, really rendered. All right. And now we put another name here. Let's say Petra, birth in 1900, and another org here. So we define these data, we define the tagline, and we say only if it's indexed, that's the case. Otherwise, it's just an empty object. And now let's see if the index page actually renders. And we are in luck. We have the top mascots. The tagline is it works. Nitro is amazing. Also follow and subscribe. Then we have Denise representing my random org, born -10,000, and Petra, and so on, so on. So that works. We can fill it with different data as well, and we're fine. And now that we got it working, let's improve it a tiny, tiny bit, because what we really need to do now is we want to ensure that the available data, like the included things, are not always refetched, because the combination usually just happens once. Like, unless you change the data, the templates, then you might want to invalidate the cache. But right now there's no cache. So let's add the caching layer there. And then I'll hint a few things that you can even do more. Then we have a summary and we're good to go. So down to the performance improvements. All the improvements will happen in the EJS.ts file, because the best part is I'll apply some techniques that I've shown you in the caching with Nitro video already. So what we can do here, we have this resolve includes function, and that's pretty much correct. I will just rename it the resolve includes uncached. And what we want to do is we want to define a cached function. So we want to make sure resolve includes is a defined cached function. So a function will be cached somehow. That is up to you. We make it async, and we just await resolve includes uncached. No params, that's fine. And in here we can set a key, or like we can just set a name first. We do like EJS includes, and then we could do a max age if we want to stay on max age, and so on, so on. So we could also just say the max age should be, I don't know, infinity if you really want to. You can also, like if you want to invalidate the cache, it's usually used with SWR, right? To make sure it's updated under the hood, behind the scenes, so it won't cause extra trouble for your visitors. So you can even set it like 60 seconds times 60 seconds, times 24, and so on. It really doesn't matter much unless you have a need to update that cache regularly. Also, you can validate that, all shown in the different video. So now we use resolve includes here, and Nitro will cache it nicely away. If you want a different storage system, of course, you can also set the base. You can also set the store for that, and so on, so on. So there are lots of options to make this even better, but we can define that to use it. Also, of course, we can now refactor things away to say like, okay, let's have an extra function that's also async to say get EJS view, for example. And in here, we also need the key, that's a string. And what we basically want to do is we want to use this in here. We need the storage for that, so we also get that over here. And we have the key, and we just return, await this, and we're good. So instead of calling this part here, we just call that. And we have that another time. If we look for get item, we have it over here. So also here we can just call get EJS view key, and we don't need to get this here at all. And await it, of course, very important. The last thing we can do, now we still have the need for the storage key somewhere else, because here we need the keys. So also this we can technically refactor to say const keys is await get EJS keys, and put also this under here with an async function, just to make sure that everything is nicely grouped and we don't have any duplicates. We can reuse that, and we are fine. So now we can call this here, and we're good. And the last thing we can of course do is we have this cache template function, and we render the template. So even here we could make this whole thing technically a defined cached function, because this is only depending on the key and on the data. So we could even say, let's just give a key and a data, and it will be fully cached, because you don't have to recalculate the whole thing again and again. So even that you could say either in EJS, right? Or here. So let's maybe make that in the EJS.ts file as well. We could say all the way on the top, let's say const get EJS template is a defined cached function. And in here you want the key, or let's make it the template key, which should be a string, and data as well, which should be, well, pretty simple. Can be record string any for now. Doesn't matter too much, but that's that. We of course want to make sure that's also async. So we have a function here, and then we can call what we did before. Not these lines, but we want to call these lines. We want to await get EJS function with the template key, and then fill in the data. We can of course use a generic as well to make sure, okay, we have a t extends. Well, we have to make that over here, but like we can type it nicer. That's something that we don't have to do straight away, but we can use generics as well to say like, okay, let's make that happen. And then also cache the whole thing. It's already cached by these properties. So if they're different, that will be different, and still define the same things over here. So we can even here say, all right, we have the name EJS template, max age, and so on. We can define a custom get key function. We don't even have to. And this will also be nicely cached. So your application will be super fast. And the only thing we have to call here is get EJS template with the key and the data then, and we're good to go. Before summarizing, let's run the whole thing in production locally with npm build and see what will happen in production there when starting our application. To do so, we of course run npm build. I already did that, so we can start the whole thing with port 3001 to not interfere with our 3000 port, service workers and so on, and just starting the application. And what we will see when we now launch the application is this. Huh? 500? Did we do something wrong? Well, there is a tiny issue right now with unstorage and Nitro in terms of how they handle different files with different endings, extensions, MIME types. .ejs has no MIME type, so that's a bit tricky. There's also an issue that will be resolved in the upcoming 3.0 release. Maybe even beforehand, we'll see, but will be probably a breaking change, though there's something we can do in userland. So what we can do here in userland is we can add a new promise here then, and we have our item, and what we want to do is we want to convert that if it is in binary to string. So what we can do is we can use buffer.from, and we say we take the buffer from that item and we want to convert it eventually to string. So in here, we save the whole thing. Now let's rebuild the application and see what will happen now in production. Also, yeah, as you've seen, I tinkered a little bit around with the ideas. You see here, there is no MIME type available for the EJS files, which is a bit unfortunate, but this is something we might be able to resolve in another unstorage library. And the good part is now, if we start the whole thing in the browser, we're back to before. So if you ever hit that issue, there we go. That's the solution. This is also an issue linked below, as I mentioned before. So don't worry about it. And let's jump to the summary. And that's it. We did it. We implemented EJS with your Nitro application. We can use any kind of storage. We can deploy it anywhere we want because it will just work. So yeah, let's give it a try. If you still have an application and wants to migrate over, definitely look into that. It's not too complicated to set up. It's a little bit more work than in Express. We just say like, hey, set the view engine to EJS and you're done. But the benefit is the universal deployment. You can use it anywhere you want. So any questions left? Drop them below. Code as usual also below. And don't forget to check out latest Stage Review episode where Michael and Eric Hanchett are talking about working in AWS and writing view code there. Super interesting. Don't forget to check out all the videos, the new videos, the ones linked. And until then, stay tuned and happy hacking.